I'm Stuart, and today we're going to be taking a look at NVIDIA's latest GPU. That's the GeForce GTX 780, and our model is from Zotac. This card is based on the GK110 GPU, which was used in GTX Titan recently, and we'll be putting it up against an overclocked GTX 680, an overclocked 7970, and using some of the latest games including Crysis 3, Far Cry 3 and Bioshock Infinite. So let's get started. Here is the GTX 780. On first impressions it looks very much like a GTX Titan. It uses the same cooler, or a very similar cooler, might be slight size differences I guess. On the left hand side we've got a window through to the aluminium fins, and then just below them, although you can't really see it, is a vapor chamber. Again, aluminium. On the right hand side here we've got a single fan which actually runs on new fan profile technology that allows it to be less intrusive, or that's the idea anyway. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in this review. Looking down at the base of the card, we can see that it is a dual slot model, a little bit of Zotac branding there, and a PCI Express 3.0 slot there, or connector even. Round at the back of the card we've got a vent there which allows air in and out of the cooler. In theory we should get a little bit sucked in and then blown across the GPU, and then if we turn around to the other side there is a vent just there which the air should exhaust from, the hot air that's come across the fins there. We've got dual DVI, HDMI 1.4, and then on the left hand side a full size display port. And looking at the top of the card we've got the GeForce GTX logo. That's green, it lights up even more green when we turn on the card, and we can control that lighting through a little software control panel that NVIDIA provide. Have it pulsing, turn it off completely, all that sort of stuff. And then over on the right hand side of the card here we've got a 6-pin power input and an 8-pin power input. They allow the card to draw its 250 watts it requires when combined with the power coming out over the PCI Express slot. And then on the base of the card you can see that there's not a huge amount going on there, no memory on the back or anything like that. Do have two SLI connectors, so configurations such as 3-way SLI are possible with GTX 780 if you've got the money to do it. And just for a couple of little comparisons, I'll just reach over here and show you the size of the card compared to a few other models. So the first one, just turn it over PCB size. We have a 680 from Zotac. This is the AMP edition, so it's slightly, or quite a decent overclock on it. Not really important just now though. So 680, 780. Cards are actually in total pretty much the same length because we've got a larger shroud on the 680. PCB a little bit bigger on the 780, just about a centimetre or so longer. So that's a 10.5 inch card. If I bring in the 17990, which is AMD's dual GPU card, just for comparison purposes, see it's actually big enough that it goes right out the shot. Just bring it in a little and you can see again 780 at the top, 7990 down the bottom, and it's about an inch, maybe a touch more than an inch longer, this 7990, so a reasonably compact card there, the 780. So just have a quick look around the card again so you can see everything that you might want. So this is the bundle of items we get with Zotac's GTX 780. It's a pretty standard bundle. We get a couple of power input converters. So this one is
2 Molex to 6-pin. We have 2 6-pin to an 8-pin. And then there's the DVI to VGA adapter. We get a little user's manual as well. There's a copy of that manual on the CD here. Zotac give us a little case sticker as well. There's the drivers on here, and we also get Firestorm, which is their overclocking utility for the GTX 780, and pretty much all of their recent cards are supported by that as well. And then the final item is a voucher for the Splinter Cell compilation. So that's a collection of 3 different Splinter Cell games, including Blacklist, and we can also get things like a voucher from NVIDIA. When we buy a GTX 780 online, we get some basically in-game money for a few different games like World of Tanks, and currently there's a promotion running in some regions where anyone buying a recent GeForce GTX card gets a copy of Metro Last Light as well. So starting our performance tests for this review with Crysis 3, we're running at 1920 by 1080. The GeForce GTX 780 is around about 6 frames per second on average, faster than the 680 overclocked model. When we then move up to 5760 by 1080, the gap closes quite a bit, so just 2 or 3 frames per second on average faster with the newer card. There is a decent chunk of FPS between the 7970 overclock and the 780 though, so about 5 frames per second faster on the new NVIDIA card. Battlefield 3, bigger gap between 780 and 680, so that's about 12 frames per second going from an overclocked 680 up to a stock clocked 780. That's average frames per second again. At 5760 by 1080, again staying with ultra, so most of these benchmarks are all ultra settings. We have a 5 frames per second advantage for the 780 over 680 and 6 frames per second on average faster than the 7970 overclock. Metro Last Light allows us to play around a little bit with physics, so we have 2 results there for the 780. There's a minor drop in frame rate when we've got physics on and physics off, so about 3 frames per second, but one of the things which is most noticeable is that a 780 with physics on is faster than a 680 with it off, and that continues on at 5760 by 1080, where we've basically turned off AA here, but the game runs quite flawlessly on the 780 with physics, faster than the 7970 and the 680 without physics. On power usage, the idle power for the 780 was the lowest in the test, a few watts lower than the 680 and around about 8 lower than the 7970 at load. 7970 overclocked and 780 are pretty much identical. Thermal performance is impacted by the fan profiles that each manufacturer uses. The 680 tops out at 77 with a custom cooler. The 780 tops out at 80, but that's the software imposed limit. We can bump that up to around 95 degrees, bump up the power limit as well, and that allows us to overclock the card by just over 100 MHz on core and memory, and that gives us a boost in 3D Mark score of around 300 to 400 points, taking us up actually to around Titan level with the 780 on an overclock. That's a stock Titan, of course. So that's the GTX 780. It can really be viewed as Titan light. Not only does it look very much like a Titan due to the same cooler being used, but it uses the same GPU as well, so that's GK110, 28nm part, and the specs on this one just been tweaked slightly, so we have 2304 cores, 12 streaming multiprocessors, 48 ROPs and 192 texture units. There is a slight change in the clock speeds as well, so on this card we get a boost up to 900, which is a little bit higher than Titan was. Memory speed is still the same though, that goes for the memory bus as well, so 384-bit memory bus on both the Titan and the 780. The 3 gigs of memory mean that it's a little bit less on that front as well compared to Titan, but overall it's a card that's really designed to fit a lower price point than the Titan and one just above the 680 obviously. It's not all about taking things away though, we do get
things on this one like GPU Boost 2.0, which was also present on Titan. All the same features like PhysX and stereoscopic 3D and 3D vision from NVIDIA, all included on this. And we also get an addition to the fan profiles. So on this one we've got slightly different noise level profiles that are meant to run smoother, so less variation when the temperature changes or when the fan needs to speed up. It does so in a way that's designed to offer less intrusive noise, and that's just basically if a fan's varying, going up and down all the time, then you notice it more than one which is smoothly going or staying roughly at the same RPM. In terms of performance, obviously not quite as fast as Titan, apart from when you overclock, because as you'll have seen from our benchmark using 3D Mark and the overclock settings, if you overclock this to just a little bit over 100 MHz on the memory and on the GPU, and you can do that by just bumping up the sliders in your overclocking tool, increasing the temperature limits, things like that. You actually get pretty much the same 3D Mark score from an overclocked 780 as you do a GTX Titan, a stock Titan that is. The comparison with 680 and 7990 is it's fairly good. The 780 doesn't quite hit the levels we had hoped that it would, but you still get a good boost throughout, so you're looking at maybe 4 or 5 frames a second minimum across most high-end games. It can rise up to 8 frames a second on some of the more recent games, but a lot of the older games actually get quite a huge boost, so the GTX 780 manages to really push those games quite far, and so you can end up with big chunks of frame rate difference between 680 and 780 in some of those older games. 7970 of course is a step down in price from the 680, and the results are pretty much as you would expect in the comparison with that. So we've got quite a jump from 7970 to GTX 780 if that was the type of move you were wanting to make for a new GPU. Big price difference between the two, of course, $320 to $340 for the 7970 and $549, this is all including VAT, for the 780 here. Switching between the 7970 and the 780 also brings up one of the other key points for this card, and that's the low noise. So we mentioned just a little while ago the fan profiles have changed on this card. It's really noticeable. If you were just going straight to 780 from an older card, you'd notice it was quieter, but in the process of this review obviously we've been going back between different cards, so the 680 overclock, the 7970 overclock, which is a dual fan model, and the stock 780, and the difference between 680 and 780 is pretty big, but the difference in noise between 7970 and 780 is huge. This is a really quiet card. It barely changes fan speed when gaming. It doesn't matter whether you're playing something pretty easy in terms of GPU demand like Bioshock Infinite or StarCraft, it runs quiet. Put in Crysis 3 or Far Cry 3, it still runs quiet, and then when you switch back to a 7970 it's really noticeable just how much louder it actually is in real world use. So overall it's a really well balanced card, low noise, decent power use, bump in speed over every other single GPU product that's around, apart from Titan, which is obviously more. If you want to head over to our website, hardwareheaven.com, we'll have a full text review of this new card. That's including more game benchmarks, including Grid 2, which doesn't actually come out until next week, but we've been given permission by Codemasters to show you the performance of that and a few screenshots as well that you won't have seen before. We've also got some extra tests in there, and extra images, basically a more expanded version of this review, frame times as well, which are obviously very important, just to keep an eye on what's happening in AMD and NVIDIA side of things. Still work to be done on 780, a bit more work to be done on the AMD side as well, and that's including with the new 13.5 beta 3 drivers that we're using. Again, we were using the latest drivers on Titan. Again, it's 780, not Titan. which are 320.18 for this card. So all the latest frame times, more games, more images, basically more of everything that we wouldn't fit into a little video review like this. And while you're over at the site, you might want to also check out the competition we've got running, which has a Zotac GTX Titan. We've got one to give away, and you can check that page out. We'll put the link in the conclusion of the written review, and then remember to subscribe to the channel. So thanks for watching our review, and we'll see you soon.